we go. So yeah, thanks for coming. We've got a really interesting talk lined up for you this evening. So really happy to welcome Elliot, who is the founder of Football for Future. So Elliot's a football fan, a climate scientist, and environmental activist, and he specialises in social movements and climate communication. Elliot studied at the University of Nottingham and the Institute of Development Studies, and has experience across the environmental movement, from global social media coordination to establishing a pioneering sustainable football organisation. And Elliot's going to talk to us a little bit about his background, how to communicate sustainability and climate change to non-expert audiences, and how this has led to his work in football with Football for Future. So yeah, without any more from me, I'd like to hand over to Elliot, and I will hand over screen sharing to you as well if you've got your slides.
Wicked. Thanks, Dan. Let's try and see if we can sort this. Can you see anything right now? Or are you still trying to share it? Oh, you're on mute, mate. Okay, so you've given me, okay, all right, here we go.
Should be able to now, yeah. There we go.
Okay, so you guys can see what you're supposed to see, I guess. Communicating sustainability to non-experts, right? You can see that?
All good.
Okay, all right, perfect. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Dan. I think covered all of the basics. I probably won't bore people and repeat them, but I thought I'd show a little bit of structure to how this is going to go, a little bit of a contextual introduction, some natural science fundamentals, the climate and environmental movement, followed by communication in the climate movement. The next section, I'm going to go into my background a little bit, obviously with climate comms woven throughout this, early life to undergrad, post-uni, on the road in XR, Homecoming, Institute of Development Studies, followed by a Football for Future case study, and then a couple of concluding thoughts. So without further ado, setting the scene, natural science fundamentals, the utter incredibleness of existence of life, billions of years of ever-refining complexity, diversity, intricacy, beauty. We are just one species among millions, and this we knowingly dismantle. Where is our sense of awe, of wonder, of humility? This is a picture that I took from a climate action once I thought was really powerful. In the words of my favorite, one of my favorite conservationists, welcome to the fucking Anthropocene. Paul Rosalie said this, he's a brilliant guy. So I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but I feel like an essential place to start is with the peer-reviewed scientific consensus. Human-caused climate change and ecological destruction will be the defining issue of humanity and potentially life on Earth. We are seeing disruption to our natural environment and the biosphere on a scale scarcely seen throughout the 3.2 billion year history of life on Earth. And this is accelerating on all fronts. Yes, climate change is natural and species extinction is natural, but what we are witnessing around us when put into the context of Earth's geologic and ecological history is very unnatural, and with the only similar precedents having resulted in mass extinction events. And all data suggests that we're on track for changes more exponential and unpredictable than what caused any of the previous critical events in the geological or ecological record apart from Earth's early formation. For context, the greatest mass extinction event in the history of life on Earth, the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Great Dying 250 million years ago, was the result of rapid climate change. About 7 degrees Celsius increase in global average temperature over 750,000 years, 750,000 years due to excessive volcanic activity in the Siberian traps. Species evolution couldn't keep up with the changing natural world, trophic cascades, mass extinction. If we're lucky, we're looking at increasing global average temperatures by 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2040. That's 1.5 degrees Celsius in less than 200,000 years compared to 7 degrees Celsius increase in global average temperatures over 700,000 years, which caused the biggest of the 5 so far great mass extinction events. We're entering the 6th. And our current temperature increase is likely to accelerate due to current trends, not only including greenhouse gas emissions, but also the destruction of carbon sinks, acidification of the ocean, and general habitat destruction. And not gonna lie, you know, the facts are terrifying when you sit with them. And what I've described is just the tip of the iceberg. And, you know, we've passed a lot of critical thresholds and positive feedback loops already, but don't take it from me, take it from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You know, these are UN reports published every 6 years or so, which are the most comprehensive synthesis papers that exist on climate. Thousands of experts around the world contribute, assessing tens of thousands of peer-reviewed papers based on relevant environmental science, technical and social economic information. It's literally the most rigorous scientific reports ever written, and still people deny it. Maybe this is because of bad communication. Here's a couple of cute climate graphs. So, oh, don't think that's meant to come up yet. It's my first run through. So we're on track for rising sea levels, more extreme weather events from droughts to typhoons, wildfires that rage for longer and with more intensity, water shortages, unprecedented refugee crises and crop failures. And history tells us that the last few of the events that I just mentioned lead to human conflict. The health of humanity is, you know, very profoundly reliant on a stable climate and a healthy ecosystem that what we so grandly call civilization is teetering on the verge of unprecedented disaster, most likely, and these are based on facts. One very, very important thing that I want to stress whilst I'm here, once again, probably preaching to the choir, but this crisis is the result of lifestyle, not population. The world's richest 10%, probably all of us, produce about half of global carbon emissions, whilst the poorest 3.5 billion account for just 1/10. The jet-setting rich who relentlessly consume and practice a globalized lifestyle, once again, probably ourselves, point the fingers at low-income countries for population, but where most of these people live relatively frugal existences, consume local produce, and have probably never been on an airplane before. You know, we're all hypocrites, and I'll come on to this later. And so the climate movement isn't even really about stopping climate change. It's about mitigating the worst case scenario, holding on to what we've got for us, our children and our children's children, and so on and so forth. But not all hope is lost. Otherwise, I don't think any of us would be here if we believed that. We have science and technology, which are pretty amazing tools. We have immense brain power and increasing will. And if Leicester could win the Premier League, I honestly believe that anything's possible, like I do. Yeah, I think that's, I always bear that in mind when people tell me something's not possible. Okay, so let's talk about the climate movement. Most of the impossible and improbable achievements and advancements that have been made in pursuit of justice causes in recent history have been the result of social movements, the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade, the feminist movements, the civil rights movements, just to name a few. The possibility of redefining development rests largely with the action of social movements. Escobar, 1992, that's one of my favorite quotes that I learned or came across in my master's. Movements, effective change, and revolutionary ideas emerge from the fringes of society, always. What's the climate movement? So it's not a single organization or a person, it's a cultural shift that's embodied and practiced by everyone who's already aware of it, by us. If done in the right way, the culture that we practice positively affects people we engage with, and it manifests in their life too. And reaches the people that they engage with. It's like a butterfly effect, a positive feedback loop of environmental conscious raising, which manifests in sustainable actions and so on and so forth. We all know that conventional politics or climate conferences for very important people are not doing the job. Policymakers and closed decision-making spaces need to be influenced and brought along in the cultural current that we are all defining. You know, the climate movement is still really young. We're all defining it at the moment, and we can't reach these people. We can't make the decisions ourselves, but we can influence the culture in which they're operating. You know, they exist in the same world as us, believe it or not. But what makes the climate movement unique to any other movement is how ultimate it is in anthropological, ecological, and climatological terms. It's all encompassing, and all other justice causes sit within it and are usually exacerbated by it. So marginalized communities are the first to suffer from climate change or breakdown. You can't have any other justice causes on a dead planet, so the saying goes. Other movements also have very particular geographies. usually confined to regions or arbitrary national borders. However, the climate movement is global and requires an unprecedented and collaborative response. An overnight mobilization similar to how whole continents have thrown their entire economic and industrial capacities behind war efforts in the past, or a COVID-19 type response is what is really needed. And these examples of rapid transition do exist. Before I go any further, I just want to address the language that I'm using. Dan chose sustainability. I'm talking about climate change. I'm guilty of using climate change a lot recently due to the industry that I'm working in football. They're not very used to this language. So I say climate change because people are used to it. But from now on, I'm going to try and use the correct terminology of climate and ecological emergency, because climate change is natural and suggests that it is natural. Other terminology obviously includes climate breakdown, ecological collapse, climate crisis. I like climate and ecological emergency as it more accurately reflects the climate situation, and it also incorporates the ecological crisis, which popular language selection often overlooks. Communication and the climate movement. So this talk is about, like I just said, communicating sustainability. But if you're trying to communicate sustainability, you're trying to communicate climate change, either implicitly or explicitly. And if you're trying to communicate climate change, you're part of the environmental movement or the climate movement. So the real focus of this talk is really climate movement communication. Our job as environmentally conscious individuals, as nodes of the climate movement, is twofold. So to facilitate sustainable action and to raise awareness, and communication is key to both of these. You can talk to anyone about anything if you say it the right way. Everything is about framing. Whole revolutionary political movements are usually not due to the emergence of new ideas, but the reframing of existing struggles. And there's obviously a whole universe of social science literature around framing theory. It's really interesting. Would recommend checking it out if you're passionate about communication and movements. But look, we've got so much information about how fucked we are, and all scientists seem to do is research and gather even more data that continuously proves how fucked we are. But we've had facts and figures and stats for ages, and the general public nor politicians listen to this. Numbers don't really work. Communication is far more than just having the best statistics, facts, and figures. I always say that you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't communicate it in the right way, it will affect no one and achieve nothing ultimately. Conversely, you can have the worst idea in the world, but if you communicate it correctly, you can conquer the world or win a referendum. You really have to promote and in many ways market your ideas. I know they don't really teach you that at university or in school, but ideas do need to be marketed and promoted. I'll come on to this more a bit later. Humans are emotional creatures. We respond to stories, passion, and functional narrative. Here I want to plug a fantastic TED talk by the brilliant, in my opinion, George Monbiot. The talk is called The New Political Story That Could Change Everything. I think it's a really nice way of talking about making change and communicating change. The new political story that could change everything. So representation's everything, and how we communicate this. And we communicate this in a variety of ways, from language to visual aesthetic. It's socio-cultural, inherently complex and difficult to measure, but you can measure it. And I think engagement is a great way to do this. Engagement is an essential ingredient if our communication is to be effective. And by being most effective, I mean breaking the echo chamber. So it's pretty brutal, but I always say that we, climate professionals, if we aren't breaking the echo chamber, then we may as well pack up our bags and go home. There's no point just talking to people that already know what we're communicating, which is probably what I'm doing to all of you right now, explaining the climate crisis. But I think it's always important to contextualize it. So in terms of communicating beyond your echo chamber, we need to consider, okay, who's the audience and what effect do I want to have? And I would say that whilst influencing climate action is a priority of ours, an essential prerequisite for sustained, meaningful action is social change. People need to want to do something and know why they're doing it, broadly speaking. They can't understand everything, but they need to have a basic understanding to feel empowered and to have some autonomy. So communication needs to focus on raising awareness or, critical climate consciousness, changing of attitudes, normalizing and popularizing what we're talking about. And once again, this is through reframing. And how do we do this? You know, we have to make it relatable. We have to make it understandable. We have to make it appealing and attractive where possible. We have to keep it simple. And remember that people aren't as educated as you. You know, talking about carbon parts per million, or even like Greta Thunberg, a lot of people have no idea what we're talking about, and we just expect, you know, that they do, and it's like water off a duck's back, it bounces straight off them. We need to focus on messaging. Loyal Kana, one of my favorite rappers, he said in one of his Radio 6 residencies recently that the sign of a true genius is someone who can communicate a very complex thing in a simple way. And the final couple of points here is, you know, don't ram it down people's throats or force it upon people. Preaching, framing it as though people must do it doesn't work. You know, people don't like having things forced upon them. Sex, religion, football clubs. You know, educate and lead by example and make it look good. It's also essential to communicate that nobody's perfect, and if only vegans who lived off-grid could stand up for climate, then there would be no climate movement. You know, we all live in a carbon-drenched world, and it's a massive barrier for people when they think that because they're not perfect, that they're not part of this. Most people who stood up against slavery ate sugar, wore cotton, and benefited from the system, but this didn't stop them from demanding system change. And we don't need to have everyone on board. Pick your battles. You know, some people you can't convince, and we've got to accept that. Like, you know, like I won't speak to some people that I know about it because I know I'm wasting my time, they're wasting their time, so we just get on, you know, and talk about football instead or something. You know, pick your battles. In social movement literature, they talk about a critical mass of about 10% acceptance within the population for a movement to make true strides towards its goal. This is very arbitrary, but the bottom line is we don't need 100% acceptance. There will be people that disagree, and that's fine. And this kind of concludes the first part, which is a summary of, you know, climate and ecological science fundamentals, the climate movement, and climate communication. I'm now going to contextualize it a little bit through a narrative of a journey of my own with the theme of climate communication woven throughout, which should give some more texture and context to the things I'm talking about. All right. Early life to grad. Go. So I grew up in Worthing, West Sussex, in like a pretty average middle-class family. My mum was a midwife, an air hostess. My dad, a fireman, cleaning chemical salesman. I had a couple of siblings, a couple of dogs, you know, nothing exceptional. I guess the only unique thing about my early childhood was that my dad must have been the only African guy in my area. He was born in Dar es Salaam, and my grandma on his side is from the Kalenjin ethnic group of East Africa, which is probably responsible for my long distance running and N'Golo Kante-like engine. Despite being mixed race, I'd say that I've lived the same privileges as my all English mates. Because of my mum's job, you know, I got to travel a lot. She was an air hostess, so I saw a lot of the world from a very young age. You know, talk about hypocrisy of carbon footprint, you know, I didn't really know, but whatever, it doesn't matter anyways, but I'm sure that probably like had some sort of effect. Family life aside, first and foremost, I'm a Brighton fan, always went to games at the Withdean with my dad growing up. We called it the Theatre of Trees, and I see it as the glory days when we had Fatboy Slim's record label as our shirt sponsor. Bobby Zamora was a fresh-faced young man, and Ben White was still in nappies. And the first form of activism that I ever experienced was actually going with my dad to demonstrations organized by Brighton fans to get planning permission for our new and now stadium at Falmer. Despite my passion for the game, I didn't make it as a pro. I went to the University of Nottingham in 2014 as an undergrad and studied geography. One of the reasons that I chose it was because it allowed, the University of Nottingham's geography course allowed for a 50-50 split of human and physical sciences, which in my opinion is how it should be, because you can't really, especially these days, understand the physical world without taking humanity into account, and vice versa. Obviously as well, because it was geography, we did loads of coloring in. But for real, it was one of the greatest decisions I ever made. You know, you'd come out of one lecture about the Milankovitch cycle and how it relates to Earth's paleoclimates, and then the next lecture you'd be learning about Henri Lefebvre's Right to the City. It really gave you the freedom to explore all natural and social sciences that you could really wish for. And then for my dissertation, I studied new social movements in Argentina. When I came out of uni, I was, you know, so freshly clued up on the natural sciences at the time and the severity of the climate and ecological crisis that I was determined not to go into finance in the city, or worse, become an armchair geographer. But at the time, there was no climate movement. It didn't exist. You know, all you really had the options of were like working for Greenpeace or signing a Facebook petition that your mum shared that, like, you know, stop straws going in the sea and murdering sea turtles. You know, climate scientists weren't thinking outside the box at all. And this was in 2017, so it's not even really that long ago. All I knew was that I wanted to try and make an impact, you know, try my best for 10 years. And then if we go past critical climate thresholds, I'll just give up and move to the jungle. But at the time I was hopelessly keyword searching sustainability on Guardian jobs. And eventually I did work for Greenpeace, but it was in street fundraising, which was like 10% very cool and 90% totally dead. Bought a one-way ticket to Hanoi. I wanted to, you know, see some of the places that we'd been learning about, experience parts of the world that I'd never really come in contact with. Ended up staying there for 12 months, working in ecotourism, education. I founded a digital marketing agency with one of my best friends. I was a sessional jazz drummer. I worked at an environmental NGO. And the brilliant thing about Hanoi at the time was that the cost of living was so cheap that you didn't have to work a full-time 5-day-a-week job that you didn't love in order to survive, like most of my mates did when they came out of uni. You know, you had a lot of time to volunteer and explore your passions, which I think was essential for general development. The people in Hanoi are wonderful, in Vietnam in general. The food's amazing as well. There's motorbikes everywhere. They love football. I thoroughly recommend visiting if you never have done. Yeah, it's a great city to be in. At least it was before the pandemic hit. I don't know what it's like now. So whilst in Vietnam, I was lucky enough to visit most of the provinces, and given its tropical Southeast Asian geography, I was hoping to see some of its native wildlife, tigers, you know, all the monkey species. This is one of my favorites. This is like a red-faced duck. Snakes, crocodiles, bears, tigers, rhinos, elephants, you know, it's meant to have them all. They're all native. But for 12 months, I didn't see anything. You know, at a time in my life when I thought that I was going to be able to experience some of what I've been learning about from books and from papers and from wildlife documentaries, I was instead experiencing the devastating impact that humans have on wildlife firsthand. 12 months later, I returned back to the UK for a couple of weeks with the intention of moving somewhere ridiculously biodiverse, ASAP. Significantly, during my time back here in the UK, I heard of a group called Rising Up who are declaring rebellion against the government for their inaction in the face of the climate and ecological crisis. And I thought it was pretty far out, but perhaps this was the movement that I've been waiting for. I went along, ended up on socials, and established and coordinated what eventually became the Extinction Rebellion global Instagram account. I didn't realize the significance at the time, and I moved to Costa Rica and continued working remotely for like a very young XR from the other side of the world. I worked at an eco hostel, and honestly, the biodiversity that I was kind of after, I wanted to like see animals, you know. It was amazing. Like the on your doorstep stuff was mind blowing. There was literally sloths in the trees, so many different species of monkeys everywhere. There was macaws, there's like pelicans flying across the water, toucans. You'd go surfing and there'd be sharks like riding the same waves as you. Like it was amazing. You know, I lived in the jungle in Belize for a bit as well. And like this whole time, once again, you know, I was working on the Extinction Rebellion Instagram and watching the account get to 1,000 followers. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then it got to 5,000 and then 10,000 and then 50,000 and then 100,000. And, you know, the whole time like engaging with so many people across the movement, very high profile celebrities, and supporting, you know, central London get non-violently shut down, which was amazing. Like that, I don't think that's ever happened in recent history. It was incredible, and the whole time, you know, I was sitting behind the movement's most consumed public interface. XR started spreading into loads of other countries by this point, and our account hit 500,000 followers, and I was kind of thinking, holy crap, like this is, you know, when's this going to stop? I was liaising with national, regional, and local XR groups across the world, and got a really unique perspective of how social movements unfold over cultural, religious, economic, and legal landscapes. You know, you'd refresh your notifications or messages, and a whole new list would emerge. it was completely bonkers, and so exciting and inspiring and adrenaline inducing. And without intending to, you know, I had a lot of responsibility, and I was putting out information that was potentially representative of a whole movement, which is kind of crazy. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a bad thing. You know, and I learned incredibly important lessons, you know, in the climate movement. Number one, you need to know what you're talking about. Your facts have to be trustworthy, otherwise they can compromise the integrity of a whole movement. I also learned the importance of amplification. You know, there's so much content out there. You don't have to create it all yourself. Just amplify other things which are happening. You know, it's free content for you, and it builds momentum and builds conversation and partnerships and networks and relationships. I also learned about how much this meant to people, you know, and I'm an idiot for not saving a lot of the messages and thanks and support, but people were so moved. XR changed the lives of a lot of people, a lot of environmentalists, very profoundly. You know, it was life-changing for many. But I also saw the flaws in the movement. You know, it had a bit of it unfolded kind of like with the colonial sort of pattern, and it was very much in the global north, and it had a bit of a lack of intersectionality. But all movements do. No organization, no individual is perfect, and obviously no movement's perfect. Now XR, Extinction Rebellion, love it or hate it, they did some amazing things and some historic things. You know, they made history. Number one, I think the most significant thing is that they provided a platform for a previously disempowered and fragmented climate conscious community. And this legacy of creating a community is one of the most powerful things that movements can do. It brings people together. You know, the environmentally conscious individuals we were fragmented before. And now some of my most valuable personal and professional connections are people that I met through those networks. And I know the same goes for so many people that I know. XR also started the conversation. It raised people's awareness, you know, love it or hate it, they put climate on the agenda. Look at the polls, and demonstrably people care more about climate. And a vast amount of governments in the UK have declared a climate and ecological emergency. That's once again because of XR. You know, their aim was not to shoot up the stock market or to be, you know, really cool in pop culture. It was just to raise awareness. So I think they did that incredibly well. Also, at the same time, you obviously had Fridays for Future, school strikes, Greta Thunberg. You know, she spearheaded all of that stuff, and you know, they kind of coincided and complemented each other really well. Obviously, the movements kind of do have a bit of a fleeting existence. None of them last forever, and the pandemic definitely disrupted their development. And it will be interesting to sort of see how the environmental movement evolves from here. XR's messaging is interesting. Obviously, they had the 3 demands. It was very, very clear. Number 1, tell the truth. Number 2, act now. And number 3 was beyond politics, which was that they wanted the government to be led by a citizens' assembly on decisions to do with climate and ecological justice. They were also very frank with their messaging. You know, it was like, everything is doomed unless you join us. You know, or humanity is going to experience, you know, an event of untold suffering. This sort of sensationalized messaging, I mean, it's grounded in reality and in climate and social sciences. Yeah, you know, it's not always the way to go, but it was an absolutely essential first step, in my opinion, for the climate movement. It was bold, it was truthful, and it was disruptive. But this can also result in like compassion fatigue and a sense of hopelessness. XR was also decentralized. So, you know, decentralization was responsible for its rapid growth, but it's also hard to keep messaging focused. Okay, so I came home from the Americas. You know, I thought, well, this is happening. I need to be in the UK, not Central America, not in the jungle. I need to be in London. You know, there's a lot of political power and influence in the UK, and there was so much action happening. There was a moment. My English is much better than my Spanish, and I had established networks in the UK anyways. So I came home and I enrolled at the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex to sort of reflect on my experience with XR and to learn more about how I can advance the climate movement in particular. I studied a course called Power, Participation and Social Change, which explores the challenges of power relations, participation and citizen engagement, and what it means to facilitate change processes in pursuit of justice causes. I enrolled in the September, and in the October, I went to a big climate demo in London. And at the time I was reflecting a lot on my identity, movement identity, participation, so it was an engagement. And I ended up wearing my Brighton shirt, this one here. See, this is the Fatboy Slim record label, Skin. I ended up wearing my Brighton shirt, and on the back of the pizza box, I wrote, oh, Institute of Development Studies, very nice. Here we go, look, Brighton fans for climate justice on the back of the pizza box. And it was amazing, you know, number one, I had loads of people shouting seagulls at me, which was, you know, quite funny at a climate action. But more, you know, interesting than that was the fact that I had so many middle-aged women, mums, I guess, coming up to me and saying, can I take your picture? Because my son, he's a big Brighton fan, but he doesn't think Extinction Rebellion is cool, or he doesn't think caring about the planet is cool. And it happened once and it happened twice. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And then it happened, I think, more than 10 times across the weekend. And it was, you know, for me, that was kind of like a penny drop kind of moment about, you know, bringing football and climate action together in a way that had never, you know, it had never really been done before. That same week, I spoke with Gail Bradbrook. She's one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, and she was like, why don't you set up a football group? So, you know, and I was also, you know, always wondering, I used to either sleep like intense during the actions, or I used to go back to my mates' houses. Obviously, I'm based down in Sussex. And I was chatting to my friends who were climate conscious, you know, my best mates, but they weren't participating. They never used to go to climate strikes. And I was very interested in participation at the time. And they said, you know, they cared about it, but they didn't want to like hold signs and have to shout. And that got me thinking about, you know, the inclusivity and alienation of climate strikes and stuff like that. And reflecting about how you could, you know, sort of take a next step or take another creative step. From that moment, in addition to movements, every university project that I did, I wrote about football. Its history, you know, football and social justice causes, the Rashford effect, football governance, fan voice, and, you know, power structures in the game, which is all underpinning this idea of a climate or sustainability movement in football. I left XR soon after for personal reasons, but I did set up a climate football group, which I coordinated for about 9 months. We organized an action of spoof football matches around London outside Barclays branches. And I think this was the first ever football climate action that's ever been done. So Barclays are the official banking partner of the Premier League, but they're also the biggest investor in fossil fuels out of any European banks. And at the same time, I came across this video by TIFO, who are a brilliant football sort of media analysis media organization, and they released a video called "Will Your Club Be Underwater by 2050?" and it's all about the relationship between climate change and football. And it says that 25% of existing, at the time in 2019 when it was published, I think 25% of existing football stadiums in professional English football would experience partial or permanent flooding due to climate change by 2050. And all of a sudden it made climate change relatable to football in a way that I'd never really understood before. So we did these, you know, these spoof matches around London. It was great fun. And, you know, my mates got involved. I put up on Instagram, I was like, does anyone want to come to this action? And all of a sudden I had people wanting to get involved who never wanted to get involved in climate before. And my dad even came along. My dad's never even been involved in climate. And I was like, wow, football is such a great way to sort of speak to people, you know, and empower people. And the hook for these games was the referee's a banker. So yeah, it was silly. And here's a list of all the clubs outside the Barclays branch. I think that was in Piccadilly. I can't really remember. And then for my final synthesis research project at uni, I was studying part-time, so it was taking me 2 years. I wanted to do a placement at an environmental football organization, but despite there being a lot of football for good organizations for LGBT justice, gender equality, racial justice, refugees, etc., there was nothing really for sustainability or climate. And I couldn't believe it, you know, like how is there like no like sustainability organization in football? It just didn't really make any sense. So Football for Future. So these slides are all pretty basic. I did draft them up in not such a long time earlier today. But anyway, so I realized at this time, like the potential for an independent sustainability football org, and was working on a proposal based on, you know, what I'd learned from my time at IDS and my experience in movements and, you know, this other football group that I was coordinating. And at this time, a chap called Chris Newman reached out to me with the same idea. He was like, I heard you're doing this football thing. It would be great to have an independent environmental advocacy football organization. So we had a bunch of brainstorming sessions, etc. And he actually came up with the name Football for Future. It's quite nice, you know. I think once again, it's got to be a brand. And we were like Triple F. It's kind of catchy, like works pretty well. We were like, what could it be, like climate and football or something like that? And it didn't really work. So we had a little bit of we spent time trying to decide what it would be. Chris, he's an incredible guy. I want to give him a shout out. He's a doctor and he's the founder of Doctors of XR, who understand the climate and ecological emergency as the #1 public health crisis. They've worked with significant medical professionals recently, including the editor of The Lancet and the general director of the World Health Organization. That was very recently. I then pitched it to David Goldblatt, who was the lead researcher on the Will Your Club Be Underwater by 2050 video. We've also got his assistant researcher, Mossy, on the team. I've watched this video so many times, and I think it's a perfect example of how researchers must team up with creatives to communicate their work, because without that video, I probably wouldn't be here now, but the same research would be, you know, it would exist, but it would just be collecting dust in a report. And David's now the chair of our board of trustees. He's a brilliant guy and he's been a really supportive figure throughout our journey. So the first thing that I guess I did was I sent a proposal to the best graphic designer I know. He's like a brand specialist, and, you know, we want to become a brand, like I said. And so shout out to Tim. His immense design skills are, you know, solely responsible for inspiring the team. He's taken the lead for the visual aesthetic of the organization, and without him, it would be nothing. So once again, this is all about framing, representation. You know, we wanted to make it sexy. We use the word sexy. It doesn't go in our official documents, but, you know, we're trying to make it attractive, cool, and relatable. We try to keep it football and engaging to market it and promote it. And I'd, you know, advise to look at the industrial or cultural space that you want to work in, whatever your specific like niche of interest is, and ask yourself, you know, what works, what other organizations do great things, where do I want to sit here, what doesn't work very well? Because, you know, if you're coming into a new sort of industry or cultural landscape, you get to look at what everyone's already done and be like, yeah, that was good, that was rubbish, that was good, that was rubbish, and just like take the best bits and like create your own, you know, thing. It's mad. It's like cheat. Anyway, around September last year, I recruited a small team who I also want to shout out to. Barney, Joel, and Mossy. And we've got Tom in this pick as well. We've got Tim in the bottom right. We've got like, Heineken, the most iconic football drink, apparently. This picture was taken not so long ago. We've got an office space in Hove that we sometimes work at, you know, and as they say, the rest is history. From day one, the main thing was that we championed football culture, you know, and also second to that, or of equal significance, is that we are underpinned by peer-reviewed climate science. As football fans, you know, we all recognized and respected football fan culture. If not, we believe that this is where our mission starts and ends. As well as being football fans, obviously, you know, we've all got degrees in environmental sciences, apart from Tim and Barney, who's our communications guy, who's works in movements. Also, shout out to Tom in the jacket. I'm actually colorblind, so I can't tell you what color his jacket is. I think it's green. Third from the right, he was the first chief sustainability officer in English football. You know, he's also a pioneer. He's a great guy, and he's joining the team. But you know, what we are is we're by the football community for the football community, and we're not dragging football into sustainability culture. We're bringing sustainability to football culture. And I think that's key if you want to work in sustainability, if you want to specialize in industries. I think you've got to respect the culture of the industry in which you're working. I think I was going to say something else about that, but I can't remember. All good. Moving on swiftly. So Football for Future. Who are we? What are we? What do we want to do? Good questions. So we want to become we want to become the home of sustainability in English football. We want to be the go-to place. We call ourselves the Kick It Out of sustainability. Kick It Out is a big sort of campaign for racial justice in English football. They've been very successful and changed the landscape of the game. We understand, that there have been pockets of action and passion, but they've been fragmented in football. There's been a footballer speaking out about this, or a club who said that, or not so much, but there have been, like signs of appetite. But we wanted to provide the platform to support this community and to encourage and to empower this community. Whether you're a fan, a broadcaster, a burger van man, or a player, say, take who scored the other day, Raheem Sterling, say, for example. If he watches the David Attenborough documentary and he's like, oh my God, climate change is so bad, I wish I could do something about it. But he's, doesn't feel confident to do something, that he can look at us and, be like, okay, Football for Future. I can like chat to those guys and they'll support me and telling me what I can do. And, it's pretty simple, really. We've got, if you've got the football knowledge and you can chat football and understand football culture, and you've got the climate knowledge underpinning you, no matter what industry you're working in, if you've got the climate knowledge, then I feel like you should be very confident, because not a lot of people have that. There's not, for example, in football, there's not a lot of sustainability expertise whatsoever. So it's a very valuable attribute to have if you are educated in climate and sustainability. So our mission is to build a more sustainable culture in English football. I'm going to go back just because I feel like it's not about us. It's more about Football for Future. We don't normally put names or faces to the organization, to be fair. Not for any reason. I think that's a good thing for movements in general. Anyway, our mission is to build a more sustainable culture in English football. So we operate as an organization in two areas: social change and action. And this should be the same for any movement, for any justice cause. You've got basically two ways of operating: social change and action, right? So social change, raising awareness and changing attitudes amongst the English football community. That's what we want to do. The football community is huge, and most of these people lie beyond the typical reach of the climate movement. So once again, this is us trying to break the echo chamber. Football is the most powerful social phenomenon on the planet, potentially. The numbers are absolutely bonkers. It brings people together across socioeconomic divides, genders, religions, ages, nationalities, languages. You go abroad and it's just mad, isn't it, when you just get to play football with all these crazy people and none of you can even like linguistically converse. So we say we want to kick off the conversation, build the community, normalize and popularize the concept of sustainability, reframe it through the language of football, and remember all the time, which is the crux of this talk, I guess, that we aren't talking to experts, we're talking to football fans. So that's why, for example, we just say climate change. We don't say climate breakdown and this sort of stuff. And I thought that development practitioners, from my master's, I went to do my master's at IDS, the Institute of Development Studies, and I felt like so dumb, they're using like all these buzzwords and this complex development words and terminologies, and it goes over my head, and it disempowers you and makes you feel small. And often, I use the analogy that these complex words don't clear the defender at the front post. So we have to really think about, okay, who are we trying to engage with here, and use their language and speak their culture, speak to them. And how do we do this like social change stuff? Well, through multimedia reporting, supporting and amplifying, community outreach and education, supporting fans and players, on messaging campaigns. Well, I see us as having a position of thought leadership because no one else is really sort of doing this at the moment, at least. It might be temporary. And currently we're working with one of the biggest sports brands in the world on an educational project with, some brilliant Premier League partners, which is really exciting. So social change, the other part of what we do is we want sustainable action. So we want to support the implementation of sustainable practices within the football, within the English football industry, working with organizations in football, including clubs from top tier to non-league, to federations, brands or broadcasters, to support them in becoming more sustainable. We want to talk their language, and everything can become more sustainable. People are like, oh, what needs to become more sustainable? Well, clearly everything can become more sustainable. So everything should really be on the table. We also, want to run future campaigns, maybe, for example, let's get single-use plastics out the Prem, or get, everyone in the world supporting Brighton and Hove Albion. So, and how do we do this part of our mission? So sustainability consultancy services we offer. So we kind of offer sustainability like consultancy packages, I guess, from auditing to strategy and policy development to PR support. And we're currently working with our first Premier League club as well. And we're a couple of months into the project and it's going really well. We've got a great relationship with them, and it's, it's very mutually beneficial. A critical thing for us in order to achieve our mission is our identity. It's, it's what makes us unique and separates us from other sustainability organizations at the moment. We see it as an essential prerequisite for us to be able to achieve our mission. How do we curate our identity? Well, by defining our values and then making sure that they're reflected in everything that we do, from partners to team members to projects, content, etc., etc. Yeah, cool. And that's about, that's about it. At the moment, we've got a small but brilliant team. We're very passionate and knowledgeable about what we're doing, but we're always learning. We make mistakes and we learn. Never a mistake, always a lesson. Acknowledging that what we're doing is, it's great for environmental sustainability, but it's also great for economic sustainability. And this is a key consideration because clubs are businesses, they're run as businesses. And going sustainable shouldn't be framed as a cost. It should be seen as an investment, because you can become more efficient as an organization. You open yourself up to new sponsorships and stuff like this, yada 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 yada. But the bottom line is that industries need to be carbon net zero by the end of the decade. This is in line with the science that I started this discussion with. High income countries such as the UK need to lead the way, and English football has immense power and potential. It's in a really brilliant position to be able to do this. There's no reason why it can't. Football is going to be carbon net zero before 2030. We've got a blueprint for it. We just need the funding. And we're going to help it. We're going to help it get there, and it's going to be great for the game. It's going to be great for the planet, and it's, importantly, it's going to be great for the fans. Becoming sustainable does not have to compromise anything that we love about the game, and in fact, it can enhance it. We're going in that direction anyway, but we just want to make sure that when football and climate collide, which is going to happen soon, it's happening now, there's a moment, climate and sustainability will never be off the football agenda. And we're trying to facilitate this coming together in the most effective and meaningful way possible. We're trying to foresee it, be ahead of the curve, create the community, and shape public attitudes, essentially. And the key questions for us that we always consider, which I think is, important for everyone working in this space, is to consider what's necessary, what changes are necessary, what's already happening, what's effective, and how can this be replicated? Because you don't need to, reinvent the wheel. Here's our beautiful faces again. Look how white and male we are. So concluding thoughts. Hope you found it somewhat interesting or helpful. Some main takeaways I'd say really quickly are, ask yourself, what's your passion? Is the industry sustainable? Yes, work with them. No, become a trailblazer. Do it yourself. There's a lot of appetite for this. To have maximum immediate effect, communicate the existing science and strategize your messaging. Partner with artists and design experts. I really think that's so important. Like the science department at your uni, collaborate with like the design department if you've got one. Like it's really important, because if you don't know how to communicate or promote your work, to make it look beautiful, then you're going to struggle more than what you would if you did. And I think that's a mutually beneficial relationship as well. I really think not so many people really do that, but I've never heard people talk about it. But I think climate scientists should partner with design experts. So where was I? Yeah, promote and market your work. They don't tell you that as well, but you need to. Engage with, empower, and support people who aren't experts as well. That's really important. So I want to do a quick shout out. So some activists, just before I finish up, I hope I'm not running over too much, Dan. Some activists who've inspired me, who are no longer here, who I want to give a shout out to, who I wouldn't be here without them. Iggy Fox. Iggy Fox, if you don't know him, he's one of the most significant individuals in the modern environmental movement, who tragically passed away in South Africa 2 years ago. He was working on a anti-poaching, like, you know, mostly female, like it was the first female anti-poaching group in South Africa. He went out there to do some work with them and tragically passed away. Shock, you know, it was a massive shock. And he spearheaded a lot of, you know, the contemporary environmental movement here in the UK, which built around the rest of the world. Like, rest in peace, that guy's a legend, so talented. Julia de Simone, she had such a passion for making the world a better place, and she introduced me to her family back in 2019 as Elliot, who works with, you know, footballers to promote sustainability, and she tragically passed away this year. She was going to change the world, and I do this work with her passion as part of her legacy too. And I also want to do a shout out to all environmental activists who've made sacrifices to travel across the country, taken days off work, missed events, sacrificed hours, been arrested, stood or slept in the freezing cold, the pouring rain, or the sweltering heat, out of pure selfless love and concern for the planet. Every one of you guys is a hero, because climate activists get scapegoated a lot, but they're all legends because they do it out of pure selflessness. You know, it's not easy being a climate activist. It's knackering. You don't get anything for it. You might get arrested. So, and yeah, I'm going to do a few shameless plugs. So please follow our socials, like everything and retweet everything, even if you don't agree with it or like football. Maybe send, you know, if you've got mates or family members who are football fans, send it to them and be like, yo, these guys, it's like a sustainability platform in English football. Check them out. It's all about the engagement. So yeah, at Football for Future, we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't do Facebook. We might be on TikTok soon. Our website, www.footballforfuture.org. You can find a couple of wicked blogs on there. We've got 2 up at the moment, about like just an introduction to the relationship between football and climate, and another one about footballers who've been talking about this. And another shameless plug to finish off, you know, we're also looking for volunteers to get involved. Roles include graphic designers, fundraisers, and sustainability consultants. You know, being a football fan is preferred, but if you're not, it's not an essential prerequisite, as is not being a 25-year-old male Brighton fan. You know, it's preferred if you're not, but once again, like, we take what we can get because we're still all volunteers. And that is everything. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Elliot. That was really, really informative, really interesting. And I think we've got a time for a few questions if people have them. I'll give people a minute to kind of think of and put their hand up or unmute or anything, but I guess I'll sort of kick it off. So I kind of came across Football for Future at first by listening. It's the Guardian Football Weekly did a podcast episode. They did a special on football and climate change, and it was David Goldblatt who he was on the panel and kind of shouted out Football for Future. But one of the really interesting things that someone else on the panel said, he's the chairman of Forest Green Rovers, who for those of you who aren't familiar, basically, so it's a really small sort of I think League One or League Two club who are basically doing all this amazing stuff around sustainability and climate change and everything. And the way their chairman sort of explained something in terms of communicating climate friendly stuff in a really positive way, I thought was just a really neat little example. And he was talking about, kind of links back to what you're chatting about at the start about food at football matches. And for anyone who kind of doesn't go to stadiums a lot, food provided at football stadiums tends to be awful and ridiculously overpriced because you're a sort of captive market, and it's usually some kind of like horrible sort of microwave burger or really cheap hot dog or something for about 10 quid. And basically at Forest Green, all their food in the stadium is now completely vegan. And, you know, the way that they communicated that as being like, well, would you rather have a kind of 10 quid really naff burger and chips, or do you want a nice kind of fresh hummus and falafel wrap for cheaper, and it's better for the climate? If you don't want to do it, bring your own food, that's fine, but we think that's better. And I thought that was a really good sort of way to use football to encourage that. So I'm not. There's no hands at the moment, so I'll go ahead with my question. So is the focus kind of at the moment exclusively on English football? Is there any sort of plans to kind of maybe focus a bit more elsewhere in Europe, that kind of
thing? Well, this was like a big consideration that we sort of had at the start. Like initially it was like global, we're just going to do football. And then it was like, well, maybe it could be a European thing, or it could be a UK thing, or it could be an English thing. And we really had to consider the geography of it, because it's, it's really important for communication and, the culture and identity of the organization. But we thought, well, we were still so young, we were still all volunteers. Taking on the world would be an incredibly difficult thing. Also, having an organization which is absolutely representative of the world is political, and it's very difficult. And I experienced that, on the Extinction Rebellion global Instagram account, when like your messaging is meant to represent everyone inside the whole entire movement, and it's not really possible to do that. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of different cultural, religious, legal landscapes that you're operating in. So that's like one thing in terms of like the difficulties of scaling up like a movement on like a global scale, that's never been done before. So we could have done European, but we just thought, we know about English football, and the most important thing is always to stick to what you know, basically. I couldn't even really talk to you much about Scottish football. I couldn't talk to you much about, European football beyond like, some of the top teams of the biggest leagues, or, biggest leagues. So that was it really. And English football as well is the most consumed domestic sport in the world. Like the Premier League has more views than any other domestic sporting league in the world. So it's not a bad place to start, given that it's right on our doorstep.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Elliot. And Rupert's got a question. I wonder if, Rupert, do you want to unmute and ask a question yourself? Or maybe I can read it out. So Rupert asked, what is the simplest action that a club can do which would have a significant impact? And also, how would you measure the sustainability of a club?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think to start with, like I said, everything can become more sustainable. What's the simplest action the club can do? Well, they could just put something on their website and say that, look, our employees are encouraged not to print their emails or something like that. That's like apparently an action. I think when it comes to club operations, Dale Vince, I think, always breaks it down into 3 sections, which is operation, energy consumption, and waste management. Transport's a really big one as well. Transport is the most, it has the most significant environmental footprint of the whole entire football industry. Dan actually wrote a brilliant Instagram post for us about the relationship between transport, football, and sustainability, which is, I think, one of the last posts that went out on our Instagram. So check that out. But I mean, what can the club do? Yeah, I mean, try and promote people taking public transport. That's a good one, but maybe you'd have to subsidize it. So maybe they wouldn't be able to afford that. A lot of clubs, like I said, are run as businesses, and it's difficult to just say that we're going to pay for trains for everyone who's got a season ticket, for example. But I think, it depends what. Everything can become more sustainable. I spoke to a head of operations at a football club in the Premier League, and they said that they've been using these like urinal tablets, and they put them in and it neutralizes the urine. So now they don't have to use any water in the whole entire stadium, which is like 40,000 seats. So it saves an immense amount of water. Imagine if every football stadium just used these like urinal tablets, like the amount of water saved. At least this would be, I don't know, I haven't worked it out. Someone please do the number crunching for me, but it would be immense. Change the menu, maybe I think sourcing your energy from a more sustainable provider is quite a significant and difficult thing to do. Charge for put a 5p charge for plastic bags at the club shop. There's just like so many like little bits and bobs that you can do, which, like I say, everything can become more sustainable. And how do you measure it? It's not very easy. You got to audit things, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of cooperation with clubs. You know, clubs, number one, they need to want to do it. You can't force clubs to do anything. And that's fair enough. You know, they're businesses. You can't tell them what to do unless it becomes illegal, you know, unless it's a legal requirement, which, you know, sustainability is going to become a legal requirement. I'd imagine that it will be a legal requirement for people to be at a certain place before 2030, to be perfectly honest. Clubs can also sign up to, this goes back to simple actions. They should, all clubs, all sporting bodies should sign up to the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Framework. Check it out. It's not very ambitious. It's 2050. So I mean, what's the point in 2050 targets? But it's a step, right? It's a very important step of intention in the right direction. But yeah, how do you measure? You've got to do audits, and there are different scopes of audits that you can do, which break down the club's environmental footprint into different depths of detail. Yeah, I hope that sort of answers.
Great, thanks. And Veronique, I think you have a question.
Hey, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting to hear about your journey. I was quite curious about what you said about narratives and stories being really important when communicating. And I was curious about what narratives do you find people respond best to? Because there's so many different ways to talk about climate change and so many different kind of emotions you can try and evoke. And yeah, which do you find people respond best to?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I don't have like a story, I guess, you know, that we tell clubs, but I think it's you're sort of framing the present and the past as this sort of unsustainable sort of model of football where fans aren't respected. That's very unsustainable. It's very wasteful, and trying to basically frame this future where, you know, a future of representation where women's football is more involved, a future of that's positive, that's sustainable. And you sort of, it's more like, I guess, painting a picture. I know, like, once again, I guess it's not a narrative, but, you know, it's got a beginning and an end to it, I guess. And you have to, and I think having a beginning and an end is absolutely essential. And once again, this kind of comes into a bit of a theory of change. With a theory of change, it's like, okay, so how does change happen? What's already happening? How can I intervene? You need to know where you're starting from, and you need to be able to communicate where you're starting from, because a lot of, you know, the football industry, they're so busy working and they've been doing it for such a long time that they're not taking a step back and reflecting on where they are. And if you can come in and tell them where they are and contextualize it for them and tell them where they can go, once again, I think it brings it to life, and it gives it a bit of texture. It gives them direction. I think that's the most important thing, in outlining like where they need to be and by when and reasons why. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers it. Once again, it's not a narrative. I don't tell them stories and fairy tales, but you know, once again, it's just like creatively communicating it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. And do we have any more questions? I guess maybe then I'll just finish off with one last one from me, and that's I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's happened or happening in football already.
That's a good question. Probably should have prepared for this one. Well, I mean, look, about 12 months ago, there was pretty much nothing. Like, the only club that I was aware of that had done anything, as you rightly said, Dan, was Forest Green Rovers. They're a League Two club. Dale Vince is the owner, chairman. He's also the CEO or owner of Ecotricity. He's an incredibly rich guy, and he's sort of used Forest Green Rovers as his project. And I think the great thing that he's done there is that they are quite radical, and they've shown like what is possible. I don't think it's the best model. A lot of fans don't like that. You know, if you tell clubs that they're only going to serve vegan food, it's not going to happen. You've got to respect that, you know, the culture of the industry or community that you're working in. But what he has done is he has taken them up the football league, so the fans are sort of like, well, you know, got to eat these vegan sausages, but they are achieving on the pitch, which is, you know, at the end of the day, for a football fan, that's like the most important thing. So Forest Green Rovers were the only people who'd done that. They were the only club who had signed up to the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Framework. Since we began our work, I think now like 5 teams in the Prem have signed up to UNSCAF, which is amazing. Once again, it's 2050 targets, and it's not legally binding, but that it's amazing, and we expect to hope and be part of, like, we're working with another club now, getting them registered, and we hope to be part of like a massive sort of movement in football of clubs signing up, which is really great. But once again, I feel like it's quite abstract, you know, it's very corporate, and it's abstract for fans to sort of like understand, you know, signing up to a UN, you know, sports for climate action framework. Like, fans don't get that. Like, sustainable operations, they don't really get that either. It's not tangible for them, and it's difficult, like I say, for them to understand. But I think more sort of tangible things, I guess, reusable pint cups and stuff like this, is like pretty cool. Most of the modern stadiums actually are the most sustainable, are the most environmentally like efficient and stuff like that. You know, the most efficient energy, best waste management practices, LED lights, reusable plastic cups with like machines that can wash them. And I think even at Spurs, you like put the cup on like on the counter, and it like fills up from the bottom and stuff like that, and then you just give it back, and they wash it again. So, you know, that's kind of happening. That's more like I say, the club operations. A couple of footballers have been talking about climate change. A classic one is Hector Bellerin, who played for Arsenal. I think he's moving to PSG. I'm not sure if he's already gone. But he's, you know, the highest profile player who's been speaking about this. And I think the power for players to talk about it is absolutely immense. You know, Patrick Bamford's spoken about it as well, and they have such a big following. You know, a lot of players have got the same or more followers than the clubs they play for on social media. And once again, in terms of reach and engagement, these people have got incredible responsibility to influence. And I think, you know, Marcus Rashford last year was a great example of it. You know, Boris Johnson says no, Rashford says yes, and then the Prime Minister says yes. You know, and that was a long campaign with just one footballer. But imagine, like, for example, did you see the other day Ronaldo like removed the Coke bottle when he had a press conference at the Euros, and then like Coca-Cola's like stock prices or whatever dropped by $4 billion. And it just shows, you know, I really believe, not that we're going to be able to work with Ronaldo as an organization. We would if, you know, but I don't want to because he's not in English football. But, you know, I believe that if Ronaldo came out and was like, wow, like climate change is so bad, you know, I've been speaking to some scientists who know what they're talking about, and we really need to unite and do something. We need to do something. I really believe that it would be sorted like in like 12 months. I think it would. You know, he's more powerful and influential than any politician on the planet, probably. You know, it's bonkers, really. I mean, but players, I think, you know, is a really interesting sort of avenue, and like part of this bigger picture. But none of them, like not many, have spoken up yet, and we hope to be able to support them to do so. I think the main thing is that they're, you know, their PR and their public image is so important to them, and if they're not experts on it, they don't want to come out and start talking about it because they'll get told that they're a hypocrite. Like I say, it's really important to communicate. It doesn't matter if you're a hypocrite, we're all hypocrites, but we're all part of, you know, we can all be part of the solution too, and that's the most important thing. What else is happening in football, Dan? I don't know. Loads of stuff. Read the blog, I guess. Follow us on social media.
Yeah, well, one great thing I saw as well is your club Brighton with like the public transport subsidy. Such a simple thing.
Yeah.
And it's another one of those things that has the sort of co-benefits, which I think can be emphasized more. Because like for me, if it's a fairly big club, and especially like sort of mid to larger towns and cities that kind of have one football club, it can benefit the city centre if, you know, instead of all the roads getting clogged up, you make that sort of public transport, and you have your pre-match ritual of food and drink in the town centre and meet your friends and then walk to the stadium. It just has so many benefits rather than everyone individually driving to the stadium from all around. But obviously that kind of, you know, depends on the context and the town and everything. Rupert has put another question. I think, Elliot, maybe you just kind of answered it anyway. So that's why do you think many footballers aren't talking about climate change? So did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I think, once again, because they're not confident speaking about it, we find that a lot of footballers do care about it. We're in conversations with a few footballers at the moment who, you know, do want to do this, and we're figuring out how they can go about doing it. I think they need support. They've also got agents who are like, you know, their mums and dads and like one person who like control like what they do and don't do. I think, you know, the reason footballers haven't spoken about it yet is because there hasn't been a movement to support them. I think that's like the main reason for it. Like Rashford, he did his campaign, but he was supported by, you know, a food bank, you know, Fair Share UK. If they didn't exist, he probably wouldn't have done it. You know, and I think there's been no institutions to support them. There's been nothing in football, you know, so I think that's one of the reasons why players have been yet to speak up about it, because they haven't been supported. They haven't had support there. Like I say, we wrote a blog about this. So it's the second blog on our website. I think it's literally called Professional Footballers Talking About Climate Change or something like this. So check it out, and there's a comment section below.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Elliot. And so yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. And so I guess just to reiterate the last few things that you said about kind of getting involved. So yeah, definitely follow Football for Future on the socials. As disclosure of conflict of interest, as Elliot said, I've kind of contributed one or two things so far, and I know Elliot's really keen for anyone else who wants to get involved to kind of you know, drop him a line if you think you'd like to get involved and have something to offer. So there's the graphic designer and sustainability consultant I think you're looking for primarily at the moment. So yeah, definitely just get involved in the conversation as well, I think is the main thing. So yeah, any closing thoughts from you, Elliot?
No, you know, I feel like said everything that I needed to over that 60 minutes, but thanks for listening. I can't even see if anyone's on the other end of the call, but apparently people have been asking questions. Yeah, like I say, if you want to get in touch, you can contact us at info@footballforfuture.org if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions, or like I say, if you want to get involved, just drop us an email.
That's great. Thanks very much, Elliot. And for anyone who isn't already following 6 Degrees UCL on Instagram as well, drop us a follow, and we hope to bring you some more really interesting talks like this in the future as well. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much for your time, Elliot. Thanks everyone for attending this evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Dan.
Cheers. Bye-bye.